I remember the exact moment I realized I had spent my entire life sacrificing for people who barely noticed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Columbus, and my daughter had just said something that made the room go completely silent. "Mom, you're good at sacrificing. That's just who you are." She said it so casually, so confidently, like it was a compliment. But in that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe something finally woke up. My name is Margaret Lawson, and I'm 63 years old. For most of my life, I was known as the strong one in my family, the dependable mother, the woman who always put everyone else first, the sacrificing mother. At least, that's what everyone liked to call me. But what nobody ever asked was whether I wanted that role. I raised my two children, Daniel and Rebecca, in a small brick house on the quiet outskirts of Columbus. Their father passed away when Daniel was just 10 years old, leaving me with two kids, a mortgage, and a mountain of fear I never showed anyone. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria for nearly 20 years. Morning shift, evening shift, sometimes both. I missed birthday parties, school plays, and weekends with friends because I was busy making sure my children never felt the absence of their father. Or, at least, that's what I thought I was doing. I packed lunches every morning before sunrise. I stayed up late helping with homework I barely understood. And every Christmas, I somehow managed to place gifts under the tree even when my bank account was dangerously close to empty. I told myself it was worth it, because one day my children would understand. One day, they'd look at me and say, "Mom, you gave us everything." But life doesn't always follow the stories we tell ourselves. When Daniel turned 35, he moved his family into my house temporarily. That was 3 years ago. Rebecca, my younger daughter, visited often but mostly when she needed something. A babysitter. A loan. A place to vent about her latest relationship disaster. And somehow, I always said yes. Because that's what sacrificing mothers do. We say yes when we're exhausted. We say yes when it hurts. We say yes even when no one says thank you. That Tuesday afternoon, we were all sitting around my dining table. Daniel was scrolling through his phone. His wife, Carla, was complaining about the rising cost of daycare. Rebecca had dropped by unannounced as usual. I had just finished cooking dinner for 6 people. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. My feet were aching, but I smiled anyway. Then Carla sighed dramatically and said, "Daycare is ridiculous. Honestly, Margaret's already here. She might as well help with the kids more." She didn't say it kindly. She said it like she was assigning a chore. Daniel didn't object. He didn't even look up. And that's when Rebecca laughed and said the sentence that changed everything. "Mom doesn't mind. She's always been the sacrificing type." The sacrificing type. They all nodded like it was obvious. Like it was my identity. Like it was my purpose. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. My children didn't see my sacrifices as love. They saw them as obligation. Something expected. Something guaranteed. Something they could rely on forever. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The same table where I had packed thousands of lunches. The same table where I had paid bills and wiped away tears when the money ran out. For the first time in 63 years, I asked myself a question I had never dared to think before. What would happen if I stopped sacrificing? The answer came to me slowly, quietly. But when it did, it changed everything. Because the very next morning, I did something no one in my family ever expected. Something that would turn my entire life upside down. And that was the day I stopped being the sacrificing mother. The next morning began like every other morning in my house. At 6 a.m., I woke up before everyone else. For years, my mornings followed the same quiet routine. I'd walk slowly into the kitchen, turn on the coffee maker, and start preparing breakfast before the rest of the house woke up. Pancakes for the kids. Eggs for Daniel. Toast for Carla. It had become such a habit that my body moved automatically, like a machine programmed to take care of everyone else. But that morning, something was different. I stood in the kitchen of my little house in Columbus, staring at the refrigerator door. And for the first time in decades, I didn't open it. Instead, I sat down at the table.
Just sat there.
The silence felt strange, almost uncomfortable, like I was doing something wrong. Then, slowly, I poured myself a cup of coffee. Just one. Not 5. Not 6. Not enough for the whole household. Just one.
For me.
A few minutes later, I heard footsteps upstairs. Then the familiar sound of my grandchildren running down the hallway. Soon the kitchen filled with sleepy voices. "Grandma, are pancakes ready?" I looked up at my 8-year-old grandson, Tyler. His hair was sticking up in every direction. Normally, I would have smiled and started flipping pancakes immediately. But that morning, I simply said gently,
"No, sweetheart."
"Not today." He blinked in confusion.
Why?
Before I could answer, Carla walked into the kitchen. She stopped the moment she saw the empty stove. Her eyebrows tightened. "Margaret, breakfast?" I took a slow sip of coffee. Then I said something that felt completely foreign coming out of my own mouth. "I'm not making breakfast today." The silence that followed felt heavy. Daniel walked in seconds later, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, before glancing at the counter. "Wait, nothing's ready?" Carla crossed her arms. "Your mom says she's not making breakfast." Daniel laughed a little, like it was a joke. "Okay, so what are we eating?" I met his eyes calmly. "Whatever you decide to make." The room went quiet. For years, my children had seen me as someone who always filled the gaps. If something needed to be done, I did it. If someone needed help, I stepped in. But suddenly, I wasn't filling the gap anymore. Carla let out a small scoff. "So, what? We're just supposed to figure it out ourselves?" I nodded. "Yes." Daniel stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" That question almost made me laugh. For 63 years, no one had ever asked if I was okay when I was exhausted, overwhelmed, or stretched too thin. But the moment I stopped serving everyone breakfast, suddenly they were concerned. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "I just decided something." Daniel frowned. "What?" I took another sip of coffee. "I've spent my whole life taking care of everyone else. I think it's time I start taking care of myself, too." Carla rolled her eyes. "Oh my God. Is this about yesterday?" I didn't respond, because the truth was yes. It was about yesterday. But it was also about 25 years of being invisible. About birthdays I worked through. Vacations I never took. Dreams I quietly buried because my children needed something first. Daniel sighed and grabbed a piece of bread from the cabinet. "Mom, no one asked you to do all that." That sentence hit harder than anything else. No one asked you to do all that. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had chosen this life. But that didn't mean I had to keep choosing it forever. I stood up from the table. "I'm going out today," I said. Carla looked shocked. "Where?" I grabbed my purse. "For a walk." Daniel looked even more confused. "A walk?" I smiled gently.
Yes.
Just a walk. It wasn't really about the walk. It was about something much bigger. Because while my family stood there trying to process what was happening, I walked out the front door of my own house. And for the first time in decades, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. But what my family didn't know yet was that breakfast wasn't the only thing about to change. Because later that week, I would make a decision so unexpected, it would shake my entire family to their core. And that's when they finally realized the sacrificing mother they depended on
Was gone.
For the next few days, the house in Columbus felt different. Not chaotic, just uncomfortable. Like everyone was waiting for me to return to my normal self. Daniel kept glancing at me like he was expecting me to suddenly start cooking 3 meals a day again. Carla acted polite, but there was a tightness in her voice every time she spoke to me. And my grandchildren kept asking innocent questions. "Grandma, why aren't you making dinner tonight?" "Grandma, are you mad at us?" Each time, I smiled softly and reassured them.
"No, sweetheart."
Grandma's just doing things a little differently now. But the truth was, I wasn't just changing small habits. Something much bigger had begun shifting inside me. One afternoon, about a week after that breakfast incident, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of old papers. Mortgage documents. property tax statements, utility bills. The house I lived in wasn't just a home.
It was my only real asset.
I had bought it 27 years earlier, right after my husband passed away. Every payment had come from my hard-earned salary at the hospital cafeteria. Late nights, double shifts, sore feet and tired eyes. But I paid it off. Every single dollar. And yet, for the past 3 years, I had been living in that house like a guest. Daniel and Carla had slowly taken over the space. Their furniture filled the living room. Their rules filled the house. Their opinions filled every conversation. Sometimes it felt like I was the one staying with them. That afternoon, I looked around the quiet kitchen and asked myself a simple question. What do I want? It was shocking how long it took me to answer. Because for most of my life, I had only asked, what do my children need? But never, what do I need? That's when I made a phone call that would change everything. I called a real estate agent. 2 days later, a woman named Linda knocked on my door. She was friendly, professional, and maybe 10 years younger than me. She walked through the house carefully, making notes. When she finished, she turned to me and said something that made my heart race. This property could sell very quickly. I swallowed. How quickly? In this neighborhood? Probably within a month. For a moment, the room spun. A month. After nearly 3 decades of living here, my life could change in just 30 days. Linda smiled kindly. Are you sure you want to sell? I looked around the house one more time. The kitchen where I raised my children. The hallway where Daniel once learned to ride his little plastic bike. The living room where we opened Christmas presents after their father passed away. So many memories lived in these walls. But lately they didn't feel like mine anymore. Yes, I said finally. I'm sure. The for sale sign went up the following Friday. Daniel noticed it first. I still remember the moment he burst through the front door holding his phone. Mom, he shouted. What is this? He pointed angrily toward the front yard. I remained calm. That's a real estate sign. I know it's a sign, he snapped. Why is it in our yard? I looked at him quietly. It's not your yard, Daniel. That sentence made the entire house go silent. Carla walked in from the hallway, her voice sharp. You're selling the house? I nodded. Yes. Daniel stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But we live here. I folded my hands gently. I know. Carla's face turned pale. Where are we supposed to go? I took a deep breath. You're adults. You'll figure it out. Daniel's voice rose. Mom, you can't just throw your family out.
But I didn't yell.
I didn't argue. For once in my life, I simply told the truth. I spent 35 years making sure everyone else was okay, I said softly. Now it's my turn. The silence that followed was heavy, because in that moment, my children realized something they had never imagined before. The sacrificing mother they relied on was finally choosing herself. And what they didn't know yet, the week after the for sale sign appeared in the yard of my house in Columbus, the atmosphere inside the home became colder than I had ever felt before. Daniel barely spoke to me. Carla avoided me completely unless she needed to say something sharp and sarcastic. Even the sound of footsteps in the hallway seemed heavier, like every movement carried frustration. But strangely, I felt lighter. For years, I had walked through that house with the quiet pressure of responsibility sitting on my shoulders. Every meal, every bill, every problem somehow became mine. Now, for the first time, that weight was slowly lifting. One evening, Daniel sat across from me at the dining table. The same table where the argument had started weeks earlier.
He looked exhausted.
Mom, he said, rubbing his forehead, this is crazy. Why would you sell the house now? I stayed calm. Because it's mine. He shook his head. That's not the point. I leaned forward slightly. Then what is the point, Daniel? He hesitated. Finally, he admitted something I think he hadn't realized himself. We thought we'd always live here. That sentence said everything. Not maybe.
Not for now.
Always. I took a deep breath. That was never the plan. Daniel looked frustrated. But you never said anything.
He was right.
I never had. For decades, I stayed quiet. I believed love meant giving without limits. But silence can slowly turn into permission. Permission for people to assume your life belongs to them. I didn't say anything. I replied gently, because I thought one day you'd understand everything I had already given. Daniel didn't respond. He just sat there staring at the table. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. The house sold. Faster than anyone expected. A young couple from Dublin made an offer almost immediately. They were excited, hopeful, and reminded me a little of what my own life had looked like decades ago. When I signed the final papers, my hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the strange feeling of finally stepping into a new chapter. That evening, I gathered Daniel and Carla in the living room. "I have news," I told them. Daniel looked uneasy. "What now?" "The house officially sold today." Carla's eyes widened. "When do we have to leave?" 30 days. The room filled with silence. But then Daniel asked the question that truly surprised me. "What about you?" I smiled softly. "I already found a place." Carla frowned. "A place where?" "Near Charleston." They both stared at me like I had just announced I was moving to another planet. "South Carolina?" Daniel repeated. I nodded. "There's a small coastal community there."
Quiet.
"Peaceful. I visited last month." Carla blinked. "You went on a trip?" "Yes." Another thing I had never done before. Taken time just for myself. Daniel looked completely stunned. "So you're just leaving?" His voice sounded less angry now. More confused. Maybe even a little scared. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I'm not abandoning you," I said gently. "I'm just finally living my own life." For years, I believed being a good mother meant giving everything. Every dollar. Every hour. Every dream. But somewhere along the way, I realized something important. Sacrifice is beautiful when it comes from love. But it becomes dangerous when it erases the person making it. And for the first time in 63 years, I was choosing not to disappear. 30 days later, I stood outside the house for the last time. The same house where I had raised my children. The same house where I had cried after my husband died. The same house where I had spent decades being the mother who never asked for anything. Daniel and Carla loaded the last of their boxes into a truck. The grandchildren hugged me tightly. "Grandma, will you visit?" I kissed the top of their heads. "Of course." Then Daniel walked toward me slowly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "I didn't realize how much you gave up for us." His voice sounded different.
Softer. Honest.
I smiled gently. It took me a long time to realize it too. Then I got into my car. And as I drove away from Columbus, heading toward the life waiting for me in Charleston, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed.
Hope.
Because the day I stopped being the sacrificing mother was the day I finally started being myself. 3 months after I moved to Charleston, my life looked completely different. For the first time in decades, my mornings were quiet.
Noticing footsteps.
No demands from the kitchen. No long list of responsibilities waiting for me before sunrise. Instead, I woke up slowly in my small apartment just a few blocks from the ocean. Every morning, I made a single cup of coffee and walked down to the beach. Sometimes I watched the sunrise paint the sky soft shades of pink and gold. Other mornings, I simply sat on a wooden bench near the water and listened to the waves. It was peaceful in a way my life had never been before. At first, the silence felt strange. After spending 35 years raising children and solving everyone else's problems, I wasn't used to having time that belonged only to me. But gradually, that silence became something beautiful. I started doing small things I had always wanted to try. I joined a local book club. I took long evening walks along the harbor. And once a week, I volunteered at a community kitchen downtown, helping serve meals to people who reminded me of the hard years I had once survived myself. But this time, the giving felt different. This time, it was my choice, not an expectation. One evening, as I was watering the small plants on my balcony, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Daniel's name. For a moment, I just stared at it. Our conversation since I moved had been polite but short. Mostly updates about the kids, school events, and the new apartment they had rented back in Columbus. But something about this call felt different. I answered. Hello. For a few seconds, Daniel didn't say anything. Then he sighed softly. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. His voice sounded thoughtful, almost nervous. Are you happy? The question surprised me. Not because it was difficult to answer, but because it was the first time in a very long time that someone had asked about my happiness. I looked out toward the dark ocean stretching across the horizon. The air smelled like salt and warm summer wind. Yes, I said quietly. I am. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I finally understand why you left. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. He continued. When we moved out, it was hard. Carla and I had to figure everything out ourselves. Cooking, bills, childcare, everything. A small laugh escaped him. Turns out running a household isn't as easy as we thought. I smiled gently. Then his voice grew more serious. And the more we handled things ourselves, the more I realized how much you had been doing for us all those years. For the first time in my life, I heard genuine appreciation in his voice. Not expectation. Not entitlement. Understanding. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said quietly. You built a life for yourself. My chest tightened slightly. Those words meant more than he probably realized. Because for decades, I believed my worth came from what I gave away. But now, my children were finally seeing me as something more than just a sacrificing mother. I love you, Daniel, I said softly. I love you too. After we hung up, I stood there for a while, watching the waves roll toward the shore. Life hadn't become perfect, but it had become mine. And sometimes I think back to that Tuesday afternoon at the dining table in Columbus when my daughter casually called me the sacrificing type.
She didn't realize it then.
But that sentence changed my life. Because the day I stopped being the sacrificing mother wasn't the day I stopped loving my children. It was the day I finally started loving myself too. And, strangely enough, that's the day my children began to truly respect me.